Thanks for having me. When I read the brief for this conference, I saw the three questions that were presented as the theme of the conference, and actually was quite inspired by that. I thought it was a really good articulation of kind of the current state of where we're at right now, how we need to be thinking. And I was a little geeked out. I'm a bit of a nerd. You're going to see that come out pretty quickly. By the possibility, I think I actually have a solution. I have an idea of how we can approach these challenges using technology. So that's what I want to share with you. But what we'll do is we'll start with those questions so we can set kind of a frame of reference and be on the same page as we go on this journey, right? So the first question was, how do we embrace opportunities in the industry transition, diversity, and change, and turn these elements into undeniable strengths for everyone involved? The second question, how do we bring diverse groups of people together, sometimes at short notice, and help them to snap into teams that operate safely and productively? And third question, how do we unleash the great human potential in these changing circumstances in the safest way possible? All right? I thought those were powerful questions, right? These are questions that challenge safety leaders all around the world. In fact, they're really questions that challenge organizational leaders all around the world. You know, in the lens of safety, we've designed and we've deployed and we've refined practices over the years towards the creation of safe working cultures, and these market forces just keep coming in and forcing us to reevaluate what does the word culture even mean. So if you Google the definition of safety culture, you find this result. A safety culture is a set of shared values and beliefs that influence employee behavior. I think that's a pretty comprehensive definition of our current perspective. Right? And with that, we have these well-established best practices around that perspective, too. We've developed and documented our policies and procedures and got everyone to adopt them. We've evangelized the priority of safety over everything else and celebrated that organizational commitment. We've done our leadership development and training to push in a top-down approach to safe work practices. We've adopted, models that illustrate the ways that culture should evolve, or workers should behave, or how we should believe about incidents. And hopefully by now, we are exploring the use of data and analytics and artificial intelligence in our safety practice. So this is where our company's been investing quite a bit of energy into this space. And what it's resulted in is this kind of interesting approach to the analytics of organizational culture. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. So I've been exploring algorithms to better understand workers, teams, and culture for about 15 years now. I'm a technology guy. I just enjoy that part of it. That makes it interesting. I've been exploring this dynamic in heavy industry here for about 2.5 years now specifically. All of this has kind of led to this pretty fascinating new approach to understanding people. And I believe that this approach will help leaders to manage their organizational culture in a more digital way, right? Leading to more predictable insights into safety and performance, irregardless of worker background. I also think it'll give us the ability to design the perfect culture for any organizational objective and sustain its performance over time. Those are pretty heady things here. Now, this approach, as you've probably guessed, is based on technology, but it's not technology-driven. This isn't about machine learning and AI. It's actually rooted in the very science that Teddy just spoke of. It can be summarized by that singular quote that he just shared with you. We don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. So Teddy was just speaking of that ever so human challenge of perception versus reality. And, it's kind of in that concept that we find that true leading indicator of cultural performance and risk. So let's go back to our definition of safety culture, right? A safety culture is a shared set of values and beliefs that influence employee behavior, right? But if you examine this statement with the awareness of perception and reality that Teddy spoke of, then you see the inherent flaw in the definition, right? Shared values and beliefs are subjective. Every worker has a different definition of what this means, and it may not be in alignment with yours, or your supervisor, or their peers, right? So how can we accurately ensure that our workers are seeing your shared values and beliefs in the same way, right? And I think it's in that question that we find the solution. So, every worker has a different perspective on shared values and beliefs. And in my digital world, we refer to this as your working mindset. Right? When you understand your working mindset, or more importantly, the mindset of others around you, as a leader, you can convey your shared values and beliefs in a way that resonates with them, in a way that speaks to their strengths. And I think this is the first step in addressing the challenges presented in the questions at the beginning, the themes of the conference. So the challenge is, how do we go about understanding an individual's perspective or mindset towards work? So, we've developed a technology to understand individual mindsets. It's rooted in integral theory, the theory that Teddy actually just spoke of. Ken Wilber, the author of that, he's an American philosopher. He analyzed over 100 developmental models, Western and Eastern spiritual traditions, kind of matrixed all that together, and came up with this theory of everything based on all the universal similarities that he found. And effectively, with this model, what he really did is he was kind of giving us a map to kind of navigate the complexities of human existence, personal growth, societal development, right? What this really does is it gives us kind of a referential understanding of just the different dimensions of perspective and reality. So, some of you may already be familiar with this model, actually. It's revealed itself in a lot of safety practices over the years. We learned from this model that, we all have this perception that's based on an interior and an exterior lens of the individual and the group, right? These quadrants illustrate the 4 different ways that we process any given action, thought, idea, everything that we do. And this is where the use of this is typically stopped, right? But the quadrants are just one of 5 components of integral theory. There's also levels and lines. There's types and stages that go with those quadrants. Types you're actually aware of. Personality is a type. We've tried to use that to understand culture. But interestingly, types are static. They don't change, so the correlation to work is loose, right? I am an introvert. When I was at a certain stage of my development, that meant leave me alone. I just want to work. I don't want to be bothered by people, right? In a different stage of my evolution, that means I'll give up and do a presentation like this, and then I'm going to leave and fall asleep, right? Because I'm not drawing energy out of the crowd. So the second component to this theory, the levels of development, provides a wealth of potential for understanding perspective, I think, in a quantifiable way. Spiral dynamics, what Teddy just spoke of, is an example of one of these models, these developmental level models. We actually work with a model of ego maturity, a developmental model of ego maturity championed by Suzanne Cook-Gruder, Robert Keegan, Jane Levenger. So, essentially these levels of development represent stages of increasing bandwidth in your perspective of any given context, right? Now, in my work with technology, I started to notice a pattern as well because I was looking at them the way that a computer would, right? What I noticed is that all these models effectively just represent a spectrum of structure and unstructure, right? In Spiral, that first level, that survival level, requires the most amount of structure, the holistic, the least amount of structure, right? In ego maturity, it's the impulsive stage that's the most structured stage. Unitive is the least. Even in the integral theory, the center point, right, being the most structured, and then you have increasing bandwidth until you exit the quadrant. Here's an interesting one. You all know this model, right? This is the Bradley curve. And it's effectively a developmental model. It's a maturity model. But you notice the same pattern, right? The reactive culture is the most structured way that a safety culture can be. The interdependent, the least structured, right? So it was that realization that gave us the inspiration for a digital approach to understanding individual perspectives towards work. So we sent out a link to this assessment called the DevQ Mindset Profile early on. Thanks to those of you that had a chance to take it. If you didn't, let us know, and we'll give you a chance to do so. But effectively, that assessment is like a mirror, this assessment that we've designed, and it reflects back to you your individual mindset towards work. There's really no right or wrong answers to it. So when you take the assessment, it asks you 24 questions about your thinking style, how you make decisions, about how you interact with culture, and what your personal sense of motivation is. And then those results of that assessment are then summarized into this score, this quotient, right? The left-hand side of the score is a reflection of your performance orientation. How do I approach work, and what do I value when I'm doing it? And the easy way to understand it is the lower the number, the more structured you like to approach work. The higher the number, the less structure you like in your job. The right-hand side of the quotient is your role preference. The lower the number, the more you like to work alone. The higher the number, the more you like to work in groups. In any case, again, there's no right or wrong answer to this. It's merely designed to create a frame of reference and thus a state of awareness about what brings you ultimate job satisfaction. So we call this the development quotient. It has its roots in the same body of work that Teddy was speaking of in his presentation, Integral Theory. Now, once you complete that assessment and you have that score, we take those scores and we match them to archetypes that are familiar to all of us about how we work. And again, you'll notice that the archetypes represent a spectrum of structure to unstructure, right? So in our model, we can characterize your working style as strategic or tactical, right? We can characterize your approach as working autonomously or interdependently, right? Imagine how differently you could interact with your team or your boss if you knew this about them. I tried to re-illustrate Teddy's slide to give you an example of the application of understanding of individual working style as a clear indicator. I think both Nikki and Teddy mentioned, a lot of this is expressed in your semantics, in your language, right? So just from listening to the leader, you can tell that he's technical. We would classify him as a technical advisor, right? Now you notice the second guy who's trying to answer the question, so what about safety? He says we just have to follow the rules, right? That's what a methodical style of working, a methodical mindset, that's how they would think about answering that question. Or we need to talk about safety as a team. That's what how a collaborator would typically respond. What do you mean by safety? That's your tactical person, right? So with that level of understanding of your team or your department or your leaders, even your whole culture, you can tailor your requests, your ideas, your projects, to the expectations of the worker in alignment with their natural way of doing things, reducing the potential for collaboration or conflicts or things of that nature. You just kind of work better together, right? So that is a summary of the individual approach, right? Sustainability, safety culture starts with a recognition that everyone has an individual mindset. It's from that perspective that workers are processing your expectations. And when you understand that, you can speak to the strengths of any worker in the most efficient or optimal way. Now, let's talk about how this can help you address culture challenges in new ways. So as I said in the beginning, we have these market forces that keep changing the definition of culture, right? Making it difficult to kind of sustain high performance. So I think we need a more atomic definition of culture, right? And this is the best one I could come up with. If we're taking everything that we've been talking about into consideration, then really culture is a group of individual mindsets working towards a common goal, right? We tend to define culture by values, like diversity. We have a diverse culture, or we have a caring culture. But the challenge is everybody has a different perspective on what diversity means or what caring means, right? So I think the most atomic way you can define it is all of those different mindsets come together in pursuit of whatever the shared objective is. So with that being said, we can go back to that same data set that we used for the individuals, and I want to show you how we use that to understand team dynamics. Because when we take these scores and we plot them as coordinates, right, then you can very clearly see potential strengths and gaps in any size team, department, or project. So this is how we've been using it. Let me explain how this works, actually. Organizations all cycle through stages of maturity and evolution, right? Everything starts with a disruption. Every company in here, you had some kind of disruption, found some great way to do something, took it to market, realized there was potential there, started to make some money. Then went into preservation mode, right? Okay, we need to establish some processes and procedures around this thing and scale it up, right? And then continue to make even more progress and success. Then at some point, your client comes along and says, that's awesome, I want more. right? So now you have to kind of go back into your thinking about this thing and say, okay, what are we doing well? What are we not doing well? What can we do next? And then you get into an innovation stage, right? And now we're trying to figure out what's next. And hopefully you cycle back into disruption again. And then the cycle begins again. Now what's interesting is, when you look at that from a lens of mindset, you realize that each one of those quadrants represents a mindset, an orientation, right? And that if you think of it in that lens, rather than the organizational life cycle lens, you can take that mindset and apply that to shorter-term objectives as well. And that's what we're able to do with this data set. So here's how we do that. As I mentioned, there was 2 scores in that quotient, right? We take the performance orientation, we plot that along the x-axis. We take the role preference, we plot that along the y-axis. Now, we always measure from the middle, because even though this is based on a vertical growth model, I believe that there is value at every single stage along the way when it comes to work, right? Everyone that plots to the left progressively values more structured work. These are your execution, tactics-oriented workers, right? Everybody that plots to the right progressively values more unstructured work. These are your strategic and visionary-oriented players. Keep in mind, this is for every single role, right? You can have a strategic project manager, you can have an execution-oriented project manager. It's about just knowing what you have. 5 and below progressively likes to work alone. 5 and above progressively likes to work in groups, right? So effectively, what we now have is the ability to visualize and identify what type of work a culture is aligned towards, right? You can say that that culture is structured and autonomous, or that's an unstructured interdependent culture. This is all about creating a frame of reference to understand what you're working with, right? You can also layer in those stages to understand what they're aligned to. You can say that's a preservation-oriented safety culture or a disruptive safety culture within that team, right? So this now gives us a visual representation of what the alignment of any group of mindsets looks like. And then you can see how they like to approach their job roles, what they're likely to value. You can see what they're naturally a fit for, and then you can use that information to see if they are perfectly fit to meet whatever the organizational objective is. You can also use this to validate other data that you're seeing, right? Let's look at some examples. This is what a preservation-oriented safety culture looks like in our world. This tells me that this team knows the rules and they're heads down getting it done. That's what they value, right? This is an example of an unstructured interdependent safety culture, right? Or an innovation-oriented safety culture. Typically, this group will be ideal for innovation-oriented goals, but they may struggle with policies and procedures that they don't believe in. All right? This one right here, I call the industrial age culture. Anybody have an idea why? You notice all the workers are in the preservation mode, and all the leaders are in innovation mode, right? Now, here's the question. Is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? There is no right or wrong answer to that, actually. It's a good thing if everybody is aware of what the company objective is, and everybody clearly understands what their role is in pursuing that objective. This is toxic if they don't, right? Because their perspectives are so different. The leaders are looking at the workers like, I don't understand. Why aren't you coming up with new, better ways to do this? And the workers are looking like, yeah, but we're down here doing it. And you guys, why are you even writing the policies and procedures when we're down here actually doing it? I've seen this situation before. It's not good. I took a sample set of our data of all the EHS leaders, right, of a group of EHS leaders and plotted them. I've been starting to see this trend. Most of them seem to be in this transition-oriented stage, which is kind of interesting to me. But what's really interesting is those innovators over there, right? They're coming at that role from a different perspective. When I plot this data, I always assume that everybody's a rock star, right? I'm not so much interested in saying what's good and bad. I'm interested in understanding what is it that you're seeing that they're not seeing, right? And how can we, use that to create a more collaborative environment or just learn. We've done quite a few construction companies, right? And I've seen this fascinating pattern where these are very successful construction CEOs, and almost all of them are preservation-oriented, right? Which makes sense for construction. You know, you have to get things done, and it has to be structured. But that can also inhibit innovation. This, for all the people that responded, by the way, is the participants of this conference. We had a large swatch of preservation-oriented folks. Not surprising, right? This is a rules-driven kind of world. But I was really intrigued that we had a handful of disruptors and innovators as well. Kind of cool. So at the end of the day, I like to say that good leaders intuitively know what's working and what's not working, right? So this is a vehicle now for being able to understand why that might be, right? If you're seeing, recordable injury rates in one place that are different from another, you could plot those two and then just get a sense of how their perceptions might be influencing that. And then that gives you the foundation for beginning to make adjustments until you can get it to a sustainable level, right? So at the end of the day, the summary of that is culture is just a group of individual mindsets working towards a shared objective. With a clear understanding of alignment, you can create positive and productive work environments. And over time, I think that alignment data gives us a quantifiable sense around how to architect culture for maximum engagement, right? So in summary, I'm a technology guy. Technology is a force of disintermediation. I think we all know that at this point, right? I miss record stores. I miss bookstores. I don't get mail anymore. It started with services, then it moved into occupations, right? Customer service. It's pretty much automated at this point. Any lawyers in the room, there's so much good technology around legal, around medical, and now we're starting to see it with cognition. Cognition is beginning to be disintermediated. I would challenge anyone in here to tell me if you remember all the phone numbers of the people that you talk to, or how much you actually use the nav versus like charting out your path with a map, right? The question is how, and the answer is because we're all driven by patterns, whether we want to admit it or not. Right? I think that the AI has shown this to be true, whether we're ready to accept it. Many are fearful of technology, particularly as it relates to privacy, but in fact, it's a Pandora's box. It's never going to be closed. So when it comes to safety culture or organizational culture in general, I think it's time to start exploring new possibilities that are more data-driven. I think it's time to prioritize that. So I want to appeal to you really quickly to your opportunistic sense, right? And present you with the possibility of solving problems identified in these original questions with a Moneyball-style approach, if you've ever seen this movie before. Moneyball was a movie based on a true story about a baseball franchise that decided to switch its recruiting strategy. Instead of drafting players based on how hard they could hit or how big they were, they recruited them based on the statistical likelihood of a player getting to the next base, right? And just that simple shift in thinking, they took a fledgling team. That year, they not only broke the record for the longest winning streak, but they almost made it to the World Series with a team that cost less than one franchise player, than one typical franchise player, right? Completely reinvented the game of baseball with this strategy. I think that leaders can use data on working mindsets to engineer high-performance, safe teams, just like the movie Moneyball, right? By looking at the gaps in perception and alignment and then correlating that to the lagging indicators that you're already using, you now get a sense of how that could happen, right? I could see you creating multiple versions of processes and procedures, some with pictures, some with bullets, right? To speak to the wide variety of perspectives that you're dealing with. Right? Or, you're introducing this language of mindset to workers and teaching them how to understand strengths and triggers, how to understand which styles they have. You can design teams with mixtures of mindsets that are statistically most likely to perform optimally or operate the safest. And you can actually find talent for roles. We have tacit knowledge that's walking out the door. You could actually capture that mindset, and then when you're trying to cross-train or succession plan, you can use that data to kind of guarantee that you're at least going to have a certain predictable level of performance. So the question is really just what kind of problems could you solve with a safety culture instrumented with this level of awareness? I know it sounds kind of dystopian. It's music to my ears. Many in this world, come from circumstances we don't understand. And without that obvious credential, it's likely that their potential may never be realized, right? But data doesn't care about obvious credentials. It looks strictly at numbers and trends, doesn't care about ethnicity or gender or nationality or any kind of isms that we hold. Data is going to level the playing field for diverse workforces and make it much easier for leaders to source, grow, and keep the perfect talent, right? So in summary, just imagine a company where people aren't resources or labor, but they're unique contributors, right? Or, where you can redefine what it means to be a team member, or where we see people not as nationality or countrymen or diversity, but as people, right? As individuals with a perspective. So I just want to close with this. This is my big prediction. In this networked age that we're in right now, the ability to predictably engineer and sustain the highest levels of performance and the lowest levels of risk in your organizational culture, I believe is going to be the biggest competitive differentiator in the market, right? And at the very least, you will measurably increase the amount of people that you can send home safely every day. Thank you.
Brilliant.